So, a cardboard box split open at a service gate at Windsor Castle, and about 40 invitations slid across the tarmac in front of 2 security officers who were never supposed to see them. Cream card. Raised lettering. Thick gold edging. And above the name Laura Lopez, printed in gold, was a royal crown. Just 24 hours earlier, Laura Lopez's office had received an email from the palace making one thing absolutely clear. No royal insignia was to appear on anything connected to her private art reception. The palace server recorded that the email had been opened. Nobody replied. And the vans came through the gate anyway, under paperwork describing the cargo as a private family delivery for the Queen. Princess Anne heard about the split box at 12 minutes past 8 the next morning. By 9, she had every door in that wing of the castle locked, with people still inside. And Princess Anne does not lock doors for a party. The guest list contained 42 names. 41 were typed. 1 had been added by hand in ink. And before the day was over, the person who recognized that handwriting had become very, very quiet. Quick word before we go further. I'm Harold. I spend my time going through everything that moves around this family. Household filings, visitor logs, court records, and the stories that disappeared before anyone finished asking questions. What you're about to hear is me putting those pieces together the way I read them. Stay with me right to the end, because that handwritten 42nd name is the detail that turns this from a family disagreement into something much colder. Now, go back 36 hours. Because the email is where this really begins. And it is the reason nobody could later claim they misunderstood. It went out at 7 in the morning. Polite. Careful. The way these messages always are when somebody senior has already decided the answer is no. Laura Lopez had been planning a private art reception, and the palace laid out the conditions in 4 simple lines. The event could not take place in the East Terrace rooms at Windsor. No royal insignia on invitations, programs, or signs. No photographers. No commercial sponsors. And the final line said the decision was final and asked her office to confirm receipt. Her office opened it. The server recorded the read receipt at 7:12. Then, nothing. Think about how strange that silence is. Every household around that family runs on confirmations. Somebody reads something. Somebody replies with 2 words. And the machine keeps moving. A read receipt with no reply is the household equivalent of hanging up in the middle of a conversation. One aide flagged it that morning and was told to leave it alone. Family matters have a way of solving themselves. Except they don't always solve themselves. About 24 hours later, 2 delivery vans approached a service entrance on the east side of the castle. Inside were lighting rigs. A champagne wall in sections. Floral arrangements so tall the men carrying them had to angle them through the doors. But none of it carried the visitor authorization normally required for a delivery into a working royal residence. Instead, the paperwork carried one phrase: private family delivery for the Queen. And that phrase changed the entire morning. The officer at the gate waved the first van through without opening it. Because inside that building, words like, for the Queen, carry a particular kind of weight. They sound like an instruction from somewhere above the person reading them. And that officer has about 4 seconds to decide whether he wants to be the man who held up the Queen's flowers. The second van was stopped by accident. One of the heavy boxes had shifted during the drive. The tape had split at the corner. The driver pulled it toward him, and the entire side gave way. The invitations spilled across the tarmac. And there they were. Laura Lopez's name. And a royal crown sitting directly above it. The exact symbol the palace had banned in writing the previous morning. Someone photographed the pile before anyone picked it up. By 10:08, that photograph was moving up the chain toward Princess Anne. And the part one keep coming back to is the money. Gold edging. Raised print. Heavy card. 42 invitations. That kind of work takes days. It costs real money. Which means somebody commissioned the print run knowing an email already existed saying, do not do this. That question landed on Anne's desk at 12 minutes past 8. And she found an answer within 20 minutes. It wasn't a printing mistake. The original design had been approved weeks earlier. Anne's office had a copy. It was completely harmless. A name. A date. An address. Nothing suggesting the monarchy stood behind the evening. Then somebody went back into that file after the warning email, and added the crown, and put both versions side by side. Same font, same layout, same border. But under Laura's name on the second version were 4 additional words. By gracious royal permission. No such permission existed. Nobody in that building had signed anything. Nobody had been asked. Yet 42 people were about to receive invitations that looked as though they had. And listen to who those people were. Gallery owners. Collectors. 2 former government ministers. Patrons whose names opened doors across London without anyone needing to explain who they were. Every one of them was holding what appeared to be an invitation to a royal event. At 8:25, and gave the order. Stop everything. Nothing goes up. Nothing comes in. The rooms stay empty. That should have ended it. It didn't even come close. Laura Lopez was already inside Windsor Castle. She had entered through a private family access point shortly before 9, carrying a thick blue folder under her arm. 3 people were with her. None appeared on the approved list for that morning. A senior member of staff caught up with them in a restricted corridor. He explained carefully that the reception had been cancelled and that he would have to escort them back. Laura didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply opened the blue folder, removed 1 sheet of paper, held it up, and told him she had authority to continue. He read it, and stepped aside. Hold on to that. Because a senior member of staff at Windsor does not step aside for a piece of paper unless that paper outranks him. Within 4 minutes, phones were ringing. Nobody in the Lord Chamberlain's office recognized the signature. Nobody in the private secretary's office had drafted it. The typed instruction was short. Please provide Mrs. Lopez with all reasonable assistance. The letterhead came from the Queen's household rather than the King's. To you and me, that sounds like paperwork. Inside Windsor, it's a lit match in a dry room. Camilla had her own household, her own staff, her own charities. And that arrangement had existed since her marriage in April 2005. That machine worked. It could not simply overrule an instruction issued in the King's name. And it certainly could not do so inside Windsor, a royal residence belonging to the Crown rather than to any one member of the family. Sandringham and Balmoral are private property. Windsor is different. So a page from the Queen's household instructing Windsor staff to assist somebody after a cancellation from the King's side was not a small detail. It was a flag planted in somebody else's ground. And wanted that page in her hands. She said so once. Then again. And people who work around her will tell you that matters because Anne normally says something once. But the page never arrived. Somebody had removed it from the blue folder before Castle security could get near a photocopier. The staff member who had read it was still in the building. He could describe the letterhead, the wording, the position of the signature. 2 assistants had discussed it in a corridor. And then the page disappeared. That was the moment, and stopped treating this as a family misunderstanding. She ordered the access logs from all 4 gates. Camera footage from the east approach. Written statements from everyone who had spoken to Laura that morning. Separately. Immediately. Every email into and out of the events office for 6 weeks. And 1 instruction above all of it. Nobody was to telephone the Queen. Camilla knew by 10:20. Of course she did. Nothing in that building stays inside 1 room for very long. Someone on that corridor had made a call within minutes of the doors being sealed. By 10, Camilla had cleared her private diary. A car was moving toward Windsor. Word came ahead of her that she wanted a family conversation. And sent 1 sentence down the line. And it reached Camilla's car before she reached the gates. This is not a family matter. Camilla came through the door angry. And sources suggest the reception itself was not what angered her. It was how her daughter had been treated in the corridor. My daughter is not a criminal, she said before she had properly sat down, and answered without raising her voice. Then she will have no difficulty explaining the missing page. Camilla held her ground. There was no page. No document. No hidden authority. Just ordinary correspondence that staff had misunderstood and somehow turned into a security incident, and slid a statement across the table. It had been taken that morning from a member of staff with more than 20 years inside that building. He had read the page. He described the letterhead. He described the
would
wording.
one day be
Two
his.
assistants
When
had
Queen
spoken
Elizabeth
about it
passed away in
Laura had used
2022,
it to
her
walk
youngest
past a
son's
checkpoint
destiny
she had
shifted,
no
but
business
it wasn't
walking
until
past.
2023
And now
that the
nobody
change
could
became
find it.
official.
Camilla read
King
the statement
Charles
twice.
III granted
Then
Prince
she said
Edward the
something that
title
moved
Duke
the
of
entire
Edinburgh,
argument
fulfilling
into
a
another
plan shaped
category.
years earlier by
Perhaps
Prince
your
Philip
staff.
and supported
Your staff.
wholeheartedly by the
She
late
could have
Queen.
said palace staff.
It was more than a
She could have
ceremonial
said the king's
elevation.
staff.
It acknowledged
Instead,
Edward's
your
decades of
staff.
service and his
And heard the
leadership of the
distinction
Duke of
immediately.
Edinburgh's award,
She
the
leaned
programme
forward.
Philip had poured
These
his
people
heart
serve
into.
the crown.
And with
Camilla
Edward
looked
becoming
straight back at her. For now. 3 words. And the temperature in that room seemed to drop through the floor. That answer had nothing to do with paintings, champagne, or 42 invitations. It was about the next reign, and about who would still be holding a key when this one ended. Everybody understood it. Nobody said it aloud. Now, a word about why and was the one standing in that room with the doors locked, and doesn't do drama, and does the work. The court circular totals for 2025 put the king at 532 engagements, and Anne at 478, at the age of 75. She returned to work after the accident at Gatcombe Park in June 2024 that put her in hospital for 5 nights with a head injury. She has never given one interview about it. She also refused titles for her own children. Zara and Peter grew up without HRH before their names, at a time when others around her were doing the opposite. So a woman with that history might look at a crown printed on a private invitation very differently from everyone else. To most people, decoration. To Anne, a boundary being crossed. And there was another thing beneath it. And was there on September 6, 1997. She watched a 15-year-old boy walk behind his mother's coffin in a dark suit, while a country watched. Whatever Anne thinks about how Diana was treated, she has never publicly explained it. But for nearly 30 years, she has stood between those 2 boys and anyone who wanted something from the name they carry. Now, back to that room. And pulled the guest list toward her. Collectors, gallery people, patrons, 2 former ministers, and then one name stopped her hand. A property lawyer. Everybody else belonged at an art reception. This man handled a very specific kind of work for a very small number of families. Trusts, charitable foundations, transfers of valuable collections, sales, and circled his name in red. She ordered a background check on the firm. The answer came back within 20 minutes. Trusts, foundations, high-value transfers, collections. The paintings on that wall suddenly mattered a lot more than the people invited to see them, and went down to the East Terrace room herself. Staff were already dismantling the display walls. Laura stood near the fireplace speaking quietly with the organizer. Behind her were 12 framed works. 2 were worth more than most houses in the country, and none appeared on the official event list. That was another problem. Anything entering Windsor is supposed to exist on paper before it exists in a room. And read the labels. 11 named lenders. The sort of people who lend a painting to a family exhibition and expect their names spelled correctly underneath it. The 12th had no lender listed. Instead, 3 words. Private Royal Collection. That label had no business being there. Because the Royal Collection belongs to nobody personally. The monarch holds it in trust for the nation. Items move under written authority. They are logged out. Logged back in. Handled by conservators. Covered by insurance schedules. You don't simply borrow one for an evening because somebody once mentioned it. This picture had no movement authority. No conservator had signed it out. No transport had been booked. It was sitting on a table in a room it had never been cleared to enter. And asked the obvious question? How did the painting get inside? Laura said she didn't know. She said it arrived with the rest of the delivery, and she assumed it came from the family. The organizer said it arrived with the official deliveries for the Queen, packed among the floral crates. The Queen's household said they had sent no painting. 3 answers. 3 different people. And none of them fit. And walked behind the frame. And there she found the detail that ended the polite part of the morning. A small paper tag was tied to the wire. No accession number. No collection reference. None of the markings expected on an institutional object. Instead, a valuation tag. Somebody hadn't simply arranged to display that painting for one evening. Somebody had been finding out what it was worth. That was the point where Anne stopped asking questions and started giving orders. Every door on the floor locked. No phones. No papers into bins. Nothing touched until somebody could explain who owned the painting. Laura looked at her. You cannot keep people here at a family event. And looked around at the dismantled walls, the champagne crates, the 12 paintings, and said, This stopped being a family event the moment somebody put a crown on the invitation. Then Laura played the last card she had. She said the painting was no longer part of the royal collection. She said it had been privately given to her mother years earlier. A gift. And asked who gave it. Laura paused. And the pause answered before she did. The king. Everything in that room rearranged itself around those 2 words. If Charles had given the painting to Camilla, then the label was correct. Anne had locked 20 people in a room over a private gift between husband and wife. But if he hadn't, then somebody had used the king's name to move a national asset into a room with a valuation tag on the back. Only one person could settle that question. And he was about 20 minutes away. Camilla did not want him called. She said so more than once. The king had enough on. She reminded Anne of February 2024, when Buckingham Palace announced his cancer diagnosis. Her husband didn't need a morning like this on top of everything else. She called the painting a small matter. She accused Anne of turning a family courtesy into a constitutional incident. But Anne sent the message anyway. Secure line. Direct to the king's private office. 3 lines. Come now. Then something strange happened. People still inside the room describe it almost identically. Camilla stopped talking. She looked at her daughter. Laura slowly turned toward the blue folder on the table. The same blue folder that had held the missing page. And saw that exchange. She didn't ask permission. She crossed the room, picked up the folder by its spine, and tipped everything across the polished table. Guest biographies. Catering invoices. A seating plan. Insurance schedules for 11 paintings. Still no authorization page. Then, something slipped from a cut in the inner lining. A folded document. It landed face up. Thick paper. Margins. Numbered sections. The tidy appearance of something a professional had been paid to prepare. The staff member in the corridor had held 1 page that morning. This one ran to 15 pages. Across the top, in bold, The Queen's Family Cultural Initiative. Read that title again. Because the dangerous word was initiative. An initiative isn't one evening. And one evening doesn't need numbered sections. The document laid out a recurring program of private cultural events at royal residences, built around Camilla's family, funded by selected corporate sponsors, and named patrons. There was a calendar, a 2-year horizon, brand guidelines, and Laura's Windsor reception was listed as the official launch. The launch that Windsor security had spent the morning treating as a daughter's art party. The launch the palace had ordered stopped in writing 24 hours earlier. The launch that still had vans arriving under the Queen's name. Now Anne understood the crown. And you need to understand it the same way. It wasn't decoration. It was branding. Somebody had been building an unofficial royal operation alongside the official one. Same visual language. Same rooms. Same authority implied by the paper. A second door into the monarchy. With its own key holders. And once something like that exists, shutting it down becomes much harder. Put 42 patrons behind a program carrying a crown. Run it for 18 months. Put it into 3 glossy magazines. And suddenly the next king isn't cancelling a private family event. He's cancelling something half of London already believes is royal. Kill it immediately. It costs you 1 morning. Kill it 2 years later. It costs you a public fight. And if you remember my earlier story about Anne and Camilla ending up on opposite sides of the same doorway, you'll remember the point. The biggest fights inside this family rarely happen over titles. They happen over access. And this was access. Written in gold ink. The king arrived shortly after midday. No announcement. No photographers. A battered red dispatch box under his arm. He looked first at the table. The papers. The empty folder. The 15-page proposal. Then he looked toward the wall where the 12th painting had been leaned while they waited. His face changed. He knew that painting. The way you know something that has hung in a room you've walked through thousands of times. And asked one question in front of everybody. Had he given the painting to his wife? Charles answered with one word. No. Laura's head turned toward her mother so quickly that people later described the movement without being prompted. Camilla said nothing. Her jaw tightened. Her hands stayed flat on the table. Charles asked to see the tag on the back. He read it. Turned the frame over. Asked who had moved the painting. Nobody answered. Then he opened the red box. Near the top was a signed and confidential instruction dated 3 weeks earlier. According to those familiar with the matter, the king had placed the painting, along with several other items, into a family trust. Quiet legal work. Signed. Witnessed. The beneficiaries were 3 children: George, Charlotte, and Louis. And suddenly everything from the previous morning had a shape. The property lawyer. The valuation tag. The urgency. The need to hold the event in that room. With those 42 people. This month. Even after the palace had ordered it stopped. The trust documents had been signed, and the asset schedule was still moving between offices. The gap between signature and completion was the only window. And think about what a photograph can do inside that window. Put the painting on a wall at Windsor. Place a label beneath it. Call it part of the Queen's family event. Put 42 influential people in front of it. Let somebody photograph it. Let a gallery owner later say, "The Queen showed me her landscape." None of that transfers ownership. But it creates doubt. And doubt is useful. Doubt gives a solicitor something to write. A letter becomes a query. A query becomes a hold. And suddenly 3 children's trust can sit frozen while people argue over what a label meant. And turned to Laura. Did she know? Laura said she had been told the artwork belonged to her mother. She said it in the way people speak when they have been repeating something to themselves all morning. And asked who told her. Laura looked down. She didn't answer. Charles didn't need her to. He turned toward Camilla. Camilla denied any secret transfer. Her husband had promised her that painting years earlier. Privately. Without lawyers. She had never treated it like a legal transaction because, to her, it wasn't one. Charles looked at her, trying to remember a conversation that had now stopped being a memory and become evidence. Then Camilla reached into her bag. She pulled out a piece of paper, folded soft along the creases, yellowed with age, and placed it on the table. A birthday note. His handwriting. That upright, slightly slanted hand so many people have seen on reproduced documents. Warm. Ordinary. A few lines about a day they had spent together. And at the bottom, one sentence. "One day the little landscape will be yours." There it was. A promise in the king's own handwriting. And suddenly everyone was arguing about something different. Camilla said it meant exactly what it said. Laura said the matter had been settled years earlier, and that she had acted in good faith. Charles said he had written it as a husband writing to somebody he loved. A line on a birthday card did not transfer an asset, and saw the danger first. A warm sentence between husband and wife was being used to pull an asset toward one side of a trust created for 3 children. If that argument ever reached a court, the family could spend years publicly debating what a man meant when he wrote something affectionate on a birthday. Charles took the note from Camilla and placed it beside the trust instruction. 2 pieces of paper. Both written by him. One written with affection and no lawyer. The other written with a lawyer and no affection. Then he ended the argument. He sent for the property lawyer, the man, and had circled in red, and asked him to explain, in front of everyone, which document governed. The lawyer read both. He took his time. Then gave the flattest answer possible. The birthday note showed intention. It showed affection. It showed that, at some point, the king had considered giving the painting to his wife, but it transferred nothing. No completed gift. No delivery. No record. The painting remained where it had always been. Insured. Catalogued. And governed by the signed and witnessed trust instruction. The trust governed. The painting belonged there. And the event had no authority to present it as the Queen's property. Camilla didn't look at anybody. And wasn't finished. A painting on a table was one problem. A false line of authority inside a royal residence was another. And Anne had not forgotten the missing page. Somewhere in that building was a document that had allowed Laura to walk past the senior member of staff after a cancellation issued in the king's name. She wanted it. She said so directly to her brother. And Charles backed her without hesitation. That was the first decision he made all day that everyone in the room respected. The search lasted a little over 3 hours. Palace staff searched every office in that wing. They pulled print queues from 4 machines. They restored deleted material from 2 mail accounts. Someone checked the paper stock records and worked out which printer tray had produced the missing page. At 2:46 in the afternoon, a frightened junior aide came back with the answer. The page had been printed and sent from the Queen's private office. Camilla had not signed it. Laura had not signed it. The signature belonged to one of Camilla's senior advisors, a woman who had worked for her for years, and who was, at that moment, sitting 2 floors below doing her ordinary Tuesday work, and had her brought upstairs. And the woman did not behave the way you might expect. No notes. No attempt to stall. No desperate search for a version of the morning where none of it belonged to her. She admitted it. She had drafted the proposal. She had written the 15 pages. She had built the calendar. She had approached 2 sponsors. She had approved the redesign of the invitations, including the crown. And when the palace email arrived telling them not to use royal insignia, she told the delivery company to put the Queen's designation on the paperwork so the vans would clear the gate. She had typed and signed the page Laura held in the corridor. Then she explained why. And her explanation left Camilla covering her face with her hands. Protect. That was the word. She said she had done it to protect the Queen. She had watched the Prince of Wales's household draw its boundaries over the previous 2 years. Slowly. Politely. An inch at a time. Fewer invitations. Different seating. Less access. Nobody explaining why. Because nobody had to. She said she had looked ahead. She imagined a future in which Camilla's family stood outside the institution with no titles. No roles. And no way back once the doors closed. Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopez hold no titles. That is real. And it was not accidental. Camilla had repeatedly wanted her children kept outside that system. But her advisor had reached a different conclusion. Being outside while Charles was king was one thing. Being outside after Charles was gone was another. So she built a machine. Sponsors. Patrons. A cultural program. A crown on the letterhead. She insisted money was not the objective. And everyone in the room believed her. What she wanted was position. A permanent, self-sustaining place for that family inside Britain's cultural life. Something built before William became king, and too established to remove later without creating a public fight. She believed she was protecting Camilla. Instead, she had used Camilla's daughter as the front door. And that is the part one keep turning over. Laura Lopez's name was underneath the crown. Her name was printed on the invitations. Her folder contained the page. She was the person standing in the corridor telling a senior member of staff she had authority to continue. Somebody had told her the event was approved. Somebody had handed her a document signed by a person she had every reason to trust. Somebody had told her the painting belonged to her mother. But when the cancellation email arrived at 7 that morning, Laura made the choice that changed everything. She ignored it. She didn't call the palace. She didn't call her mother. She didn't call the king's office. She didn't call any of the people in London who could have confirmed the truth in 90 seconds. She read something that contradicted what she wanted to believe, and carried on with the morning that felt better. And didn't care who Laura's mother was. Her anger wasn't personal. It was institutional. That name had helped get vans through a gate, move an asset into a room without clearance, push a senior member of staff aside, and turn a private family wish into something that looked like an instruction from the crown. The king ended it within minutes. He dismissed the advisor on the spot, with the private secretary present and a note taken. He ordered all 42 invitations destroyed. The painting was logged, its condition checked, and returned to secure storage that afternoon by Royal Collection staff. Then Charles made the situation even more painful. Laura left Windsor through the family entrance shortly after 3. 2 staff members walked with her. One ahead. One behind. That's what happens when somebody's access is withdrawn rather than simply expired. A groundsman stopped working and watched with a rake in his hand. A catering worker who had been there since 7 stood in a doorway holding a tray of glasses she never got to put out. Nobody spoke to Laura. At the gate, someone recorded her registration in a book. Camilla watched from a first-floor window. When she came downstairs, she wanted an apology. Not for the cancellation. For the corridor. The questioning. The way her daughter had been walked to a car in front of the staff. And refused. 11 words. No softening. Charles tried to fix it. He talked about everybody being tired. About family. About how none of this needed to leave the room. And that attempt at peace became the spark. Camilla turned on him. Then on Anne. She accused Anne of humiliating her family in front of the household simply to demonstrate authority. She said Anne had spent the day performing power for a nephew who wasn't king yet. She said the painting was only an excuse. And let her finish. Then she said the thing that emptied the room. She was protecting the throne. William had nothing to do with it. And the only reason any of this had been possible was that Charles had spent years refusing to say clearly where affection ended and authority began. Nobody spoke. Charles closed his eyes. Because underneath all the shouting, she was right. And I think that is the hardest part of this entire story. Charles had spent a very long time trying to knit two families into one. He wanted his wife's children treated warmly. He wanted his sons to accept them. He wanted Christmas to work. Those instincts are understandable. But he never clearly drew the line. He never sat everybody down and said, warmth is not access. A birthday note is not a deed. And family courtesy does not carry a crown. He left things comfortable. And vague. And vague is an invitation to anyone willing to interpret it generously. He had done something similar decades earlier. The country watched what uncertainty could cost. Diana's two boys walking behind their mother's coffin on September 6, 1997. William learned early what an unsaid rule can cost. And watched him learn it. One sentence at the bottom of a birthday note nearly became part of a dispute over property. One advisor filled the silence with 15 pages. One daughter walked through a checkpoint because she had been allowed to believe family access outranked palace rules. And honestly, who taught her that? The story got out 4 days later. Sideways. Small. The way these things usually do. First came a photograph. A delivery van at the service gate, taken from a public road by somebody who thought the floral crates looked interesting. Then a diary column mentioned a cancelled reception at Windsor. Then a Sunday paper carried a fuller version. Careful. Unsourced. Built around the phrase. An event that never took place. By midweek, a headline had placed the words, "The Queen's family," beside Windsor in a way nobody inside the building wanted to see. The palace said nothing. No statement. No denial. No briefing. 2 of the 42 guests told friends they had received an invitation. And then silence. For about 10 days, people online argued over whether, by gracious royal permission, had ever been legitimate language. It wasn't. And now you know why. But there was still one final piece. After Laura Lopez had left, and picked up the guest list again, she had circled the property lawyer's name in red that morning. Now she looked at the rest. 42 names. 41 had been typed by the same printer. Same font. One clean run. But one name had been written by hand in ink, added after the list had already been printed. And stared at it. Laura hadn't written it. Camilla hadn't written it. And knew both their handwriting well enough to know that instantly. The advisor had spent the afternoon admitting everything she had done. And a woman who had already lost her job had little reason left to lie about one name. Charles came over, looked at the list, and recognized the handwriting immediately. Because it was his. He had written that name weeks earlier, before the cancellation email, before the crown appeared on the invitations, before the vans arrived. Before the valuation tag. Before Camilla told and that Windsor staff served the crown. For now. The 42nd name was the property lawyer. Charles had known about the initiative from the beginning. He had seen an early version. He thought it sounded rather good. He had suggested that Camilla take proper advice about ownership. And he had written the lawyer's name on the guest list himself so someone would remember to invite him. Then the thing grew teeth. Sponsors appeared. The crown went on to the invitations. His private secretary started asking questions. And Charles stepped back. He let his household shut it down for him. He let his wife's staff carry the consequences. And he sat in that room watching a woman lose her career for building something he had once encouraged. He never told anyone to move the painting. That much was true. But he also never told anyone not to. Camilla sat there realizing her husband had allowed her to stand in the fire alone. Laura had spent the morning believing the palace was behind her. Because, quietly, part of it had been. And had spent the day defending the institution from a plan its own head had helped begin. All three had been reacting to the same empty space. And the person who was supposed to fill that space had been sitting in the room the entire time. And didn't shout. And has never been known for shouting unless she's on a horse. She picked up the guest list, walked around the table, and placed it in front of her brother, face up, the handwritten name pointing directly toward him. You could have stopped this on the first day. Charles didn't defend himself. He didn't deny it. He didn't explain. For once, he didn't find a version of events where he had simply been somewhere else. He looked at the pale rectangle on the wall where the painting had hung for an hour that morning. He looked at the bin containing the torn gold invitations. Then he reached into his jacket, pulled out a fountain pen, dragged the 15-page proposal toward him, and drew one heavy black line through the words, "The Queen's Family Cultural Initiative." Underneath it, in that same upright handwriting from the birthday note, he wrote a new rule. No private family member acts with royal authority. Then he signed it, dated it, and pushed it into the middle of the table where Camilla could read it. Laura's name was nowhere on that page. It didn't need to be. Everyone knew who it was for. 3 children now had that painting protected by the trust, and none of them had ever seen it. Their grandmother had been dead for 29 years. And the thing Diana had spent her final years frightened of was exactly this. A house full of adults making decisions about her sons and their children in rooms nobody else was allowed into. And couldn't stop that in 1997. She stopped this one before 3 o'clock. She gathered her papers, put the guest list on top, and walked toward the doors without saying goodbye. Behind her, Charles sat alone at a long table. A birthday note that had promised too much, a security order that had arrived too late, and a torn gold invitation that should never have existed. The king was surrounded by his own signatures, sitting inside the wreckage of the sentence he had never said clearly enough. And Camilla went home carrying the only thing she had brought into Windsor, a lie somebody else had told on her behalf. She had spent the day defending the version of her daughter who never checked, the version of her advisor who never asked, and the version of her marriage where a line on a birthday card could somehow outrank a signed instruction from the king. All 3 versions died on that table between midday and 3. And Camilla was the one who had to go home and live with what remained. Now the question. Because I've been going around this one for a week, and I keep landing in 2 different places. Did Anne shut down a genuine attempt to borrow the authority of the crown before it grew into something a future king would have to destroy through a very public fight? Or did she take one badly handled art reception and use it to close the palace doors on Camilla's children for good? Tell me what you think in the comments. Because I've read that guest list about 40 times. And I still can't decide whether the man who wrote that 42nd name was careless or clever. And next time, the part nobody has touched yet. 3 weeks before any of this happened, somebody moved 4 items out of a room at Windsor and logged them under the wrong reference. And one of those 4 items still hasn't come back. I have the reference.